needing to know, your limits and have restraints. Like, how do you walk me through how you get over the creative blocks? Because as an artist, I mean, you have creative blocks. So, like, what do you do in order to move through those? Welcome to another episode of the Nebulos Entertainment Podcast. Today, Eric is going to be walking us through part of the creative piece of developing Stormward Sails. So I'm going to ask him some questions, and we can get right into it. Eric, how you doing? Good?
Not too bad.
All right, that's good. So Eric, like, what was the original driver behind you wanting to become an artist, create art, develop art? Walk me through your backstory before Nebulos.
So, big picture, sort of high level is I've been drawing since, I was really little. I don't know the specific age, but my parents would probably know. And it's just something that I stuck with through school and college, and then post-college into, adult life. I've always just maintained drawing for the most part. That's been the main medium. I've explored other, like, painting and things like that, but drawing's the one that stuck for sure.
Right. And you're talking pencil and paper, right? Or you talking like colored pencils and markers?
So it's crayons, actually. But for the most part, I would say 90% of what I've done in the past has always been graphite on paper. And, I've explored like charcoal and stuff like that, especially in school. We did a lot with charcoal. But it's pretty much always been pencil. And then there's been some, colored pencil works in there and things like that. But black and white graphite is just sort of been my staple forever, which is such a vast difference from what we've done so far.
Right, but you paint digitally now more than you do pen and paper, right? Or pencil and paper?
For like final Nebulos stuff, yeah, for sure. And I do a lot of digital work, but almost all of my digital work still starts out pen and paper, or pencil and paper, because I like to sketch and get my ideas down that way.
Right.
And then, scan them or whatever, and then do digital coloring or whatever it may be. But yeah.
Awesome. So, all right, so that's a little bit of the backstory. Now, if we get into Stormward Sails and Nebulos, so fast forward a little bit after college, we have Nebulos. Now, with creating the game and the aesthetic and the design behind it, like, what was the original inspiration for developing this cartoony aesthetic to the game?
Yeah. One of the classes I had in college was an animation class, traditional animation. So, flipping through frames to create an animation. And one of our assignments, we were given to create a character and then create a unique walk cycle for them. It's a pretty standard animation assignment or sort of early first project. And I created this little skeleton pirate guy and gave him like this kind of swagger walk. I probably have the animation somewhere. I should see if I can find it. But when Connor and I had started, talking about Nebulos and stuff like that, we landed on that character, and it was just sort of like calling back to the games we played growing up, and like the Ratchet and Clanks, Donkey Kong, Mario, all of those sort of like cartoony, vibrant characters. So that was where we wanted to start. And that, one thing led to another. You sort of came in pretty early, and then we shifted focus to Stormward Sails as like a beginner kind of project. And we wanted to go with something that was still stylized, that would maybe fit with that character. Even if we didn't use that character initially, we wanted to sort of build a world around him.
Right. Which I think that the game actually portrays that pretty well. I think that there's a lot of room to work with the original character. So let's talk a little bit about your workflow then, because with developing a game, from the creative side, there's so many things to do. So talk to me about like your workflow, how you stay organized, how you manage to get things done.
Sure. So with Stormward Sails being our first project, it became sort of about quickly iterating ideas. So sketches happened fast, and I did, a couple of them before saying, okay, this is sort of the style I want. Then I would take that sketch and then open up Blender and get into 3D and try to create a 3D version of that sketch. So like, the palm trees, the houses, the boats, everything in that game sort of spawned from me working it out on paper initially. And then the key art and things like that, and the character art that you see, I believe, Asher pops up a bunch through the story.
Right.
Those were all, started on pencil and paper. Then I took them I have an iPad Pro, and I use Procreate, which is a digital painting app that is, super popular and widely used. But that's what I used to create all the digital assets that were 2D.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even what I used to create the textures for the 3D art. I would UV unwrap, which is a process where you basically cut apart a 3D model and lay it flat, and then you paint the textures over top so that model, when you put it back together, looks like an actual object instead of just a big gray box. So Procreate was pretty much like the MVP piece of software for Stormward Sails, for sure.
So other than Procreate, did you use anything else, or like what else have you used? I know like 3ds Max, Blender, but what else do you use from an artistic standpoint? Not necessarily in-game, like in-game versus out-of-game. What are the softwares that you use that have helped you?
Yeah, so I just talked about Blender. That was the biggest one. I've got some experience with 3ds and Maya, but for the sake of cost and learning curve, we went with Blender. So I do a bit with that outside of game development. Like, it's fun to just do little side projects like 3D characters or something like that kind of get you more familiar with the workflow.
Right.
I'm super versed in Photoshop, and I did use that a good bit for like tweaking color palettes or creating user interface elements for the game. And I used that way in the past before I had an iPad. I used that for digital painting as well. It's super powerful, but the portability of the iPad and Procreate was just awesome. Like, I could sit on the couch and work on something. I didn't have to be anchored to a desk.
Right. Yeah, so like this episode is an all up. Like, this is a high level overview, kind of like the business one that we just did, of the creative side. So like, if we were to dive into the nitty gritty piece, like, you obviously have like environmental, you have character development, you have much more like in-depth areas to the creative side. Like Eric was talking about UV unwrapping, he was talking Blender versus Procreate. I know that he's used ZBrush, so there's those softwares as well. So, this is more of like what we would have on the workshop for the Patreon post, right? So like, if we were to talk like workflow for like character development versus painting or developing a nice environment setting, like this, you would do this through the like the workshops, right? For like the Patreon. Right. Okay.
Yeah, just like more in depth, like you said, just pick a topic and then go into the literal step-by-step process I went through for making, boats, environments, art, user interface stuff. There's plenty there,
Oh yeah.
We can talk about any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, any artist that has done game development knows, number one, there is a ton to do, right? So like, if they're sitting there and they need to do it all by themselves, like, it's a pretty big mountain to climb. And number two,
Mm-hmm.
just because you're well versed in one area of art does not make you well versed in another area. For example, you could be very good with character design and character development, but you might suck with depth perception throughout like the environment and creating like a movable landscape
Mm-hmm.
as the player goes, right? So like just because you're well versed in one does not make you well versed in the other, but you have to have that ability to learn and teach yourself and be patient. I think, Eric, other than like being patient, what has been, I mean, maybe patience has been like the biggest character trait that you've needed to develop Stormward Sails?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Um,
I know like patience and
patience,
consistency.
yeah, patience was the big one. Consistency was also tricky because we've never done this before. So when I was going through and making the different biomes, I had ideas for specific environments and specific boats even that were more detailed and more outside of the style that we were going for. So I had to learn to rein myself in because I can, I come from a very more, I wouldn't say like hyper realistic, but I do a lot of more realistic art as a hobby. So wanting to make the boats really cartoony and really sort of stylized was a big effort in restraint because I had to like say, no, don't add all these fine details. Make it, appealing from 50 feet away where you see this general shape. It's like, okay, this is different than the other one. If you have to get in and look at something with a magnifying glass to see a difference, that wouldn't work for what we were trying to achieve. So restraint, again, was right up there with patience because there was so much to learn. But, if I found a workflow, and when I found a workflow for creating a boat or creating an environment asset, I tried to then replicate that process across all of the assets that had a similar, feel.
Yeah, no, that's a good one for sure. Definitely knowing your limits and being able to stay within them, because it's great to shoot for the stars, right? But it doesn't matter if you're shooting for the stars if you can't even put a game out. And a lot of indie devs run into that. Their eyes are bigger than their stomach, and they want to shoot, past the moon for the stars, and they never get there because it's just a never-ending process, and it's just a hard mountain to climb. So no, that's a good that's a good piece for sure. Along those lines, right? Along the lines of having the patience, needing to know your limits and have restraints. Like, how do you walk me through how you get over the creative blocks? Because as an artist, I mean, you have creative blocks. So like, what do you do in order to move through those?
Mm-hmm. This, I think, is definitely a topic that we could go for a while, but for me personally, I totally change gears. If I was working on Stormward Sails and I was just not, like things weren't coming out the way I wanted, I would totally stop and do something else. If it was, brainstorming a different project or working on, personal art that I do, like graphite, something that I'm good at. There was an analogy or I guess that's what I would call it, analogy where somebody said you need to have two types of projects. You need to have ego projects and learning projects. So ego projects for me are the things that I know I can do well. They still give me a bit of challenge, but I know that I can work through it. So doing graphite portraits and things of that nature are the fallback. Ego projects, do those, feel confident in it. Stormward Sails, game development, that kind of art is the learning project for me, where I can go and go and go, and then something just isn't clicking. So instead of pushing past and potentially burning myself out, I would take a step back and just walk away for a little bit. And it does wonders,
Right.
because you step away for an hour and you're like, oh, what if I try this? And then you can maybe come back and push past. But if you don't step away, or if I don't, everybody's different, but if I don't step away, the work suffers for sure.
Right. And I think along those lines too, what you've used, I know you've used this, and what other people have used too, is expanding your horizon in terms of like, reading a book, watching a movie, listening to a soundtrack, like something that can help drive that inspiration, that creativity. They also, this is my next question to you, like, do you have like a favorite time, more productive time of day, and or like a setting that helps you with your inspiration and your creative thinking?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Um, for me, I like typically in the evening after work when my brain can kind of be winding down. Um, I really like to sit at a desk and either put on, and I'm a sucker for, old sitcoms and just like shows or movies that I can kind of unplug from and not really have in my brain. And the biggest thing though is music. I listen to a lot of instrumental music, like game scores or movie scores, while I create, and those seem to really help. Um, so yeah, and I know that that's different. Some people like pure silence. Some people want to be have their mind focused on something else. But me personally, I like to sort of just disconnect and
Right.
have most of my focus on what I'm creating. Part of my brain goes to listen to music or you know watch Scrubs or something like that.
Right. So along these lines, like, has being an artist, being a creative mind, has this helped you in other areas or aspects of your life as well?
For sure. I think the way that if I'm just going to be, using a more literal application, the way that I've learned software, like 3D software and stuff for game development, and sort of where I learned that I can take um, inspiration from, and when I find what helps me be productive, those things have then carried over into other projects that I work on. They carry over into work, things like that. Just the lessons that you kind of learn from drawing, especially, that's the one I can speak to the most, is it's patience.
Right.
A lot of people I know don't want to try to draw because they're like, oh, that how long does that take? It's like,
Yep.
doesn't really matter.
Everybody
So
wants to be good at everything without putting the work in. People,
yeah,
to your point, they want to be able to draw and create art right away. You know, they think like if they pick up a pencil, they're gonna draw something that belongs in the Louvre. It's just not how it works. It's not how it works.
no,
But
no, and like the best thing about it is that there's always room to improve. So once you find your drive, like I always thought that art was and drawing and things like that were, 10% talent and 90% work, just like anything else in life. Athletes, musicians, all that stuff. You have the spark, you have to insulate it and give it fuel to get it to grow.
right. So if we talk a little bit, if we go back to the game side of things, like off the top
Mm-hmm.
of your head, like what were some of the easiest things to build from a creative standpoint, and what were some of the most difficult things to build, just for Stormward Sails?
Okay. That's a good question too. The easiest things for me were for sure the environment assets. So like the rocks and the trees and all that kind of stuff, because I could get those to look stylized more easily just, working the way that I do. Whereas the ships and the enemies and things like, all that kind of stuff that was um I'm not used to seeing it stylized. Like I'm not used to seeing stylized pirate ships and things like that. So that was a huge challenge because a lot of times I found myself creating ships that looked like another one I had already made. Like I felt like I could only push the forms so many ways, and then I would have to like basically scrap it and start new and try to do something else. So that was definitely a challenge for me, was taking something that I had never really seen a lot of stylized versions of something and then making them stylized.
I will say too, just because I know the answer to this, that VFX is VFX.
Oh, I don't even consider that because I was so bad at that. It was so tough.
So
I just.
No, I was just gonna say. So because Stormward Sails was a 3D game, would you have the same answer for something that was 2D? Would it be similar?
So, or if we're talking about VFX or just in general?
Just in general, in terms of like the environment being one of the easiest things you've done.
Yeah. Characters. So that's environments. I've seen so many Disney movies and Pixar movies and DreamWorks and all those that have those really strong environments. That I think just in my brain, I sort of have a visual library built up of all of these different references, essentially. And with characters, so, as we're shifting to new projects and stuff like that, creating stylized characters is the new challenge. Because a lot of the drawings that I do that you've seen and that I share are the graphite drawings I do, which are portraits, which are more realistic. So creating a cartoony stylized character is like way out of my wheelhouse. So it's a challenge, but I think it's a really interesting lesson in basically taking what you know and pushing it into a new direction. So like I know human anatomy for drawing. So how do I take that knowledge and then, what do you expand on from there to create something that is, cartoony.
Right.
So that's, very similar to Stormward Sails, where it's the things that I know more of the real life versions of, or I have realistic reference in my brain of, those are the things that are tough for me to shift and create new cartoony versions of. I keep using that word, but it's the best one that comes to mind.
If anybody takes anything away from this episode, it's cartoony. Just take that with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're doing. So
is that even an actual? I guess it is a legit word, huh? Cartoony.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, all right.
If it isn't, it is now.
Yeah. So probably the last question I have for you is, from a high level standpoint, if somebody was starting today from nothing in terms of like game development, in terms of just being an artist, like what would you say to them? Like what advice would you want to give them for starting out from nothing?
Start small.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's good to have big goals for sure with any type of project, any type of idea that you might have. It's good to have a big idea, but you need to peel that back and work and start to build a foundation of small iterative steps. So, if it's a game development, you can want to make the next big MMO, which a lot of people want to do, but that is huge. So take it back and say, okay, I want to make a cool character for an MMO, or I want to design a neat world for an MMO. And then just take those elements and bring them back and bring them back and bring them back until they're at their most simple form and work on those. And then once you feel you've got a good grasp on that, add something to it. And then slowly that ball starts rolling and you've got this visual library of projects or, art that you've created that all is in around one central idea. And it's like, hey, there's an IP for you.
Yeah.
So it's start small. That's the best way I can put anything.
Start small, be patient, find out what you want to do, what you enjoy, and follow it. So is there anything else from a high level standpoint you would like to add to this episode from a high level creative standpoint, I should say?
Not really. I think, we've gone over a lot of the general sort of discussions that we've just had as a team over the years. So
yeah,
I think, again, just start small. If you are interested in doing something, find a project and don't be afraid to walk away from it if you get creative block. Because if you push past it, you might lose your love for it. That's another big one that I should have mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you kind of had mentioned it, like you bounce around a little bit, like a few different aesthetics so that it can keep you, you can eventually come back to it. So, no, I think that's a lot of good information. We appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to this episode. If you would like to support us, dive deeper into the world of game development, and be a part of the workshops that we have been talking about this episode, you can subscribe to our Patreon starting at $1 a month. Here's some of the art that we have so far. Here's Eric's stick figures here. This is Pelikana. This is Asher. He was part of Stormward Sails. And I say Eric's his stick figures. But yeah, this is just some of the artwork that we have for January and for February. But no, it's sketches and key art. That's what it is. I'm just a d-bag. But that's how we go. The link will be in the description. You can follow us on social media as well at Nebulos_ENT. If you would like to subscribe to the newsletter, you can do that at nebulosentertainment.com. Above all, remember that there is a story in all this, but it is up to you to choose how you write yours. Have a good night.